and I'll be sitting here with you today. Is there anyone that's new to InsightLA? Yeah, okay, welcome. And is there anyone that's brand new to meditation? Or newish? Okay. Great. So our program for today, we'll do meditation, about 40 minutes. I'll give some guidance initially and then probably trail off into more silence. Then I have a topic. We'll talk about the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and then we should have some opportunity for questions, answers, discussions, etc. So beginning by just noticing your posture. This general sense of what it's like for the body to be seated. A sense of uprightness of the spine. Maybe a sense of connectedness to the chair or the floor. And you can close the eyes or soften the gaze. Turning the attention inward and noticing what it's like in the body. What sensations are most prominent. Be noticing if there are any emotions present. And gently connecting with that experience. Maybe noticing if there are areas of the body where there is some sense of pleasant. Some sense of well-being, some sense of ease. Could be the palms of the hands, or the bottom of the feet, top of the head. Connecting with the felt sense of pleasant, wherever you might notice it in the body. And perhaps seeing if you can notice the attitude of the mind. Kind of like the mood of the mind, whatever might be coloring how you're relating to this moment. And even in this attitude of mind, there can be some sense of pleasant or unpleasant. Not trying to change anything, just noticing what's it like in the mind. perhaps scanning the body for any area of tension or holding, constriction. And on the exhale breath, inviting the body to settle, to soften. Softening and settling with a kind of attitude of welcoming what's ever present in this moment of experience. And then connecting with the feeling of the breath as it moves through the body. And this direct experience of breathing, not as an idea, not as a concept, but as a visceral experience. Perhaps feeling the rise and fall of the belly. Perhaps feeling the rise and fall of the chest. Perhaps feeling some air in the nose or the throat. And connecting to this visceral experience wherever it's most prominent, or even following the cycle of breath from the initiation, the full breathing in, all the way to the end of the exhale. And everything else rests in the background. Our thoughts, our concerns, emotions, sounds, just there in the background. Nothing to push away, nothing to get rid of. Just filling this field of awareness with the feeling of the breath moving through the body. And whenever you notice that the attention has wandered from the breath, It's not a problem. Just soften and connect again to the felt sense of the breath moving through the body. Letting the attention be soft and gentle, restful. No need to make anything happen. Just allowing the mind, the body, the heart to naturally settle. As we begin to get settled, it can be interesting to connect with the more subtle aspects of the breath. Perhaps noticing the breath in the upper back. Maybe connecting with any sense of the breath as an energetic movement. The sense of enlivening on the inhale. The sense of relaxation on the exhale. If you notice some experience continually pulling you away from the breath, perfectly fine to take a few moments to fully investigate that experience. Maybe a sensation in the body, bringing the attention there, connecting with the felt sense of that experience. Using that experience as the object of the meditation. Another fruitful area of investigation is to notice the beginning of the breath. And the ending of the breath. And the sense that the breath, from beginning to end, is constantly changing. integrated meditation with a few moments of gratitude practice. Bringing to mind someone or something for which you have a sense of gratitude. And if it's a person or an animal, you might connect with the sense that they're sitting here with you. And then seeing if you can connect with the felt sense of gratitude as an experience in the body. Noticing where the sense of gratitude resides in the body. And the quality of this experience, the feeling tone, usually quite pleasant. Perhaps imagining some space around this experience of gratitude, allowing the experience to expand, infusing more and more of the body. As a kind of nourishment, a kind of antidote to everything else in our field. And then letting go of that practice, letting go of any idea of meditation, any sense of doing, and just resting. Experience is still happening, but there can be a sense of everything being in the background. And the awareness filled just with this sense of being. So I'm just going to dive in, go straight through. soon as you have to talk, you have to clear your throat. Today I wanted to talk about the Satipatthana Sutta, which is the source text of the Buddha's teachings on mindfulness. And I'm going to kind of do this as a little bit of an overview. It's the sutta itself is about 20 pages, but I'm using this book, which is several hundred pages of relatively small print, as the kind of inspiration. So that's just to say that this is a very sort of like 30,000 foot overview, and this will be familiar to many of you and maybe new to some of you. The Buddha is actually quoted as saying that he could talk about the Satipatthana Sutta for 100 years without running out of things to say. So that's why I need the extra time. So this is a training in awareness, and there are like many positive reasons to train our awareness, but I wanted to just mention a few of them. This book, written by a monk, Venerable Analayo, he talks about this as, I'll read you his quote, deliberate cultivation and qualitative improvement of the receptive awareness, and the de-automization of habitual reactions and perceptual evaluations, culminating in an undistorted vision of reality as it is. So maybe some of that will get unpacked as we go through. One of the most important developments for me in this process of learning to meditate is to move from the conceptual way of relating to our experience to the more direct, felt sense, immediate experience. And I think this is very much a cultural phenomenon in the West, that we're very trained to kind of that sort of left brain thinking, many of us, and there's so much virtual reality that's happening that it's very easy to get caught in a simulation of the world from our thoughts, our views, our ideas, which is fine and has its place, but also balance that with some connectedness to what's actually happening in the other ways of knowing, the felt sense way of knowing things. This is a quote from Mark Nepo that speaks to this. When we hesitate in being direct, we unknowingly slip something on, some added layer of protection that keeps us from feeling the world. And often that thin covering is the beginning of a loneliness, which if not put down, diminishes our chances for joy. It's like wearing gloves, and every time we touch something, and then forgetting we chose to put them on, we complain that nothing feels quite real. Our challenge each day is not to get dressed to face the world, but rather to unglove ourselves, so the doorknob feels cold, the car handle feels wet, and the kiss goodbye feels like the lips of another being, soft and unrepeatable. So another development as we train our awareness is the ability to more and more reside in this place of knowing, to connect with the part of us, this capacity to know our experience, as distinguished from being kind of in the midst of our experience, totally absorbed and sucked into our experience. We shift our relationship with what's happening in the mind, the endless thoughts, the endless emotions, the body and all its complaints, to see more the sky-like nature of mind through which all these phenomena are passing, coming and going. there's so many things, but the last thing I'll say is that one of the things that happens when we practice regularly is that we develop concentration. We develop a mind that is more gathered, a mind that is more collected, a mind that is more able to stay with whatever object we place it on. And in that process of being gathered and collected, the activity of the mind settles down, the body can be more relaxed, which is itself a fruit of practice. But more importantly, in the clarity of there being a less cluttered mind, a more gathered mind, we begin to see what Analia was talking about, an undistorted version of what reality really is. These are the insights that we speak about in meditation, and the reason that this place is called InsightLA. So the 4 foundations of mindfulness, I will just name them first. The first is the body. The second is feeling tone. The third is the mind. And the fourth is dharmas, or dhammas, which I will explain. So mindfulness of the body is actually a very broad activity in this framework. Body includes the breath. It's primarily our practice this morning. The body includes meditation on posture. This is a whole practice that people do, just being aware when they're seated, being aware when they're standing, being aware when they're lying down. Activities of the body, so the ones that are listed are like flexing and extending the limbs, eating, drinking, urinating, defecating, falling asleep, waking up, talking, keeping silent, just daily activities. That this is a frame in which we can practice training our awareness. Reflections on parts of the body. This is a practice that people do. There are 32 parts of the body in this framework, and people will learn the list and chant it or reflect on it. Sometimes this is called the meditation on the foulness of the body, and it's kind of an antidote to when we become sort of like over-attached or over-enamored with the body. And in places where people are practicing as monastics, they take a vow of celibacy. So, there's nothing kills the mood like contemplating bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, spleen, tears, grease, saliva, mucus. You get the idea. It's also a kind of a precursor to the Contemplations on death, which is the last on this list, which in our culture seems a little bit morbid, but actually the practice is supposed to be enlivening. It's supposed to be connect you with the preciousness of this life and the fact that this life is fleeting. Like probably the only thing we know for certain is that we'll all die, and to be prepared for that as best that we can. The framework of the body in the Satipatthana includes elements. So you can, the traditional elements from ancient time, you can feel the earth element in the body, the hardness of the bones. You can feel the liquidity of the body. You can feel the air in the body. And you can feel the heat in the body, or coolness. So the way in which the body is treated in spiritual practice is often a little bit confusing. There's a little quote from Eduardo Galeano. The church says the body is a sin. Science says the body is a machine. Advertising says the body is a business. The body says I'm a fiesta. And even this word, we use this word spiritual, like meditation is a spiritual practice, and the idea of a spirit is something that's like wispy and ethereal, and yet we're talking about the body here. And then, body is advertising, like all the cultural overlays we have on the body about how it looks and how it's performing, and we're a culture that is so simultaneously preoccupied with the body and yet somehow disconnected with it in some way. Sometimes there's a sense that this body is who I am. But if you've ever seen a person who's dead or been around a corpse, it's very clear that that chunk of stuff is not the person that you knew. And even the Buddha practiced in a way where it was quite current at the time and still current, where it was in a kind of an extreme asceticism. The idea was that, it was very clear that the desires of the body and the insatiability of those desires is a problem. And so the solution that they came up with was to kind of like beat the body into submission. And so he and his tribe, he had a tribe of 5 other people that he was practicing with, and they would do all kinds of really strenuous things, like staying in very difficult yoga postures for extended periods of time, or not lying down, or lying down on a bed of nails. There's one passage where the Buddha talks about how he tried to hold his breath for extended periods of time. And they would eat just a tiny morsel of food a day, I was going to say barely enough, but not even enough. So this is from the Buddha. My body became extremely emaciated. My backside became like a camel's hoof. My spine stood out like a string of beads. The gleam of my eyes appeared to be sunk deep in my eye sockets. The skin of my belly became stuck to my spine. If I tried to ease my body by rubbing the limbs with my hands, the hair fell from my body as I rubbed. So basically he was dying. And there's all kinds of legends where different sort of ethereal beings, devas, would come down and try to convince him, like, this wasn't the way, or some of them said, this is the way, so it's like a debate even then. And then there was this moment where he, he's by a river, and he stands up to go to the bathroom, basically, and falls over. And this woman from the village nearby, Sujata, sees him and says, oh, here's an ascetic, and he looks like he's struggling. So she offers him some gruel, and he takes it, and he eats the gruel, and he's refreshed, and then he has this reflection. He remembers when he was about 9 years old, he was some sort of an event with his father, who was sort of like the leader of the peoples, and he was sitting under a rose apple tree, and then he spontaneously went into a state of absorptive meditation, just something that happened. The conditions were just such. And what he remembered about that experience was that it was very pleasant. There was a lot of pleasure in it. And so he began to see that, torturing the body in this way is not appropriate, that actually there is pleasure in these sublime meditative states. So his companions saw him eating what my teacher calls the ice cream of the day, and they got disgusted and abandoned him. And then this is the moment where he became resolved to awaken and sat beneath the tree with this kind of resolve that he wouldn't get up until he had awoken. And then here we are talking about that 2,600 years later. So the Buddha said, it is within this fathom-long body, with its perceptions and intellect, that I declare there is the cosmos, the origination of the cosmos, the cessation of the cosmos, and the path of practice leading to the cessation of the cosmos. So he was really saying is that, the whole puzzle of how it is that we get to a place of peace and well-being and ease is actually in this body. So the body is not only kind of where we struggle, but it's also ultimately where we find our liberation. So Kabir says, "Be strong then and enter your own body. There you have a solid place for your feet. Think about it carefully. Don't go off somewhere else." Kabir says just this: just throw away all thoughts of imaginary things and stand firm in that which you are. So I want to talk a little bit about mindfulness of breathing, because it is sort of the most popular of the ways of practicing with the body. In Pali it's known as anapanasati. Pana means breathing in and breathing out. Anapana means breathing in and breathing out, and sati is usually translated as mindfulness or awareness. And this word pana is related to the word prana. And those of you who have done yoga may know this word, as it has a kind of like a life force energy quality to it. And so my sense personally is that one of the reasons that the breath is such a fruitful place to work with is that we are connecting with this kind of primal system, energy system. And when we bring the breath in awareness, one of the things that awareness does is it allows a kind of self-regulation. And so the self-regulation of the breathing, when we can really let the body breathe itself, is actually very physically healing and calms us on a nervous system level. And often the idea of how the breath should be is very different from the body's sense of the breath. Like, what I've noticed is that when I'm in states of being a little bit more concentrated and there's a little bit more ease in the body, that actually the breath becomes more subtle. Sometimes it can almost feel like you're not breathing. And we might have some idea that the breath should be deep or some particular way, but one thing that's been very interesting and fruitful for me is to just sort of trust that the system knows what the conditions call for. The breath is also a good object for meditation because for most people it's kind of neutral, or maybe sometimes a little bit pleasant or sometimes slightly unpleasant, but not extreme. And objects of meditation that are neutral are helpful because there's no, you notice the mind wanders a lot, and so the keeping it on the object is building the capacity for mindfulness. Something is especially pleasant, then it's like coasting downhill a little bit. And this was maybe, at least that I'm aware of, the only specific practice that the Buddha described himself doing in the entire Pali Canon. And this was the practice he was doing on the night of his awakening, and also the practice he continued to do after he was awakened. So you don't have to worry that you will outgrow it. So here are the instructions for the meditation practice. You begin by finding a place. The traditional place is at the base of a tree or an empty hut. There's some sense that, it's supportive to have a place that's secluded. So at this time they're talking about going in the forest, sitting by a tree, sitting in an empty hut. So there's not a lot of interesting things in the hut to distract your attention. And then here we are in an urban environment, so we can't always have the kind of physical seclusion that's being talked about, but we can have the sense of the mind providing that seclusion, the way in which the mind turns inward and is not connecting with the exterior world for those moments of practice. So sitting at the base of a tree in an empty hut, crossing the legs, body erect. Crossing the legs is not really our culture so much here, so we don't do it. If you can, it's a great way to sit. If you can't, chair is fine. One of my teachers, Gil Fronsdale, says that we're going to have to redo all these statues of the Buddha because the next Buddha will be sitting in a chair. The spine being upright is very supportive in the way that it allows the energy to flow more easily and also can keep us more alert. So however you sit, if you're able to sit, sitting upright is supportive. But it's also said that you can meditate in any posture, seated, lying down, walking, standing. I've done a lot of standing meditation. Lying down meditation is challenging because it often leads to sleeping meditation. But there are ways you can train yourself to stay alert even while lying down. So finding your spot, sitting, establishing mindfulness in front. This is a very strange expression, establishing mindfulness in the front. And what's interesting about that is that it's not like doing mindfulness or mindfulnessing. It's like an activity that connects with the awareness that's always there. Like you hear meditations, see, okay, stop being aware. And of course you can't do it. Like the awareness is always there, but there's a certain way in which we're connecting to the awareness that is different in the mindfulness practice. So bringing mindfulness, awareness to the front is like bringing it to the forefront of the mind, connecting more intimately with that part of you that is knowing the experience. And then contemplating, in this case the body, diligent, sometimes the word ardent is used, clearly knowing and mindful, free from desires and discontent. So diligent and ardent, like this is often the opposite of the kind of instructions you'll hear in meditation, where we're often focused on doing less and being more relaxed, and partly because we're in a very driven culture. You might hear different instructions if you're in Asia, actually. But there's this sense that there's a deliberateness to this, and a kind of consistency, and a kind of energy that we can bring to our practice is very important. An intentionality. So diligent, clearly knowing. Clearly knowing is this capacity that Anali was talking about in the quote, where our sensitivity, the awareness is more refined. It can connect with more and more subtle experiences and recognize those experiences. So for example, when we get to the section on mind, you can connect more intimately with particular states of mind and know what they are, and know how they're influencing your perception and your behavior. Clearly knowing. In fact, one of the ways mindfulness is described, there's this word sati, which is never really translated, kind of seems to mean more like awareness, but then there's this other word, sampajanya, which is like the clear knowledge, and sometimes like awareness with clear knowledge is how mindfulness is defined in the teachings. So contemplating the body, diligent, ardent, clearly knowing and mindful, free from desires and discontent. Well, that's such like a tall order. There's sort of two aspects to this. One is the notion of seclusion, free from desires and discontent as they relate to the world, I think is the full quote. So the sense of like we're not engaging for a period of practice with the world in the same way, that the mind is being secluded, and in that seclusion there's a kind of freedom from the usual concerns of the world. My interpretation of this is that this points to a kind of softening, a kind of injection of kindness, of compassion, that the desires and discontent are there, but this is an opportunity to relate with them in a kind of different way. And the movement that I was speaking about towards welcoming, towards allowing, towards greeting every experience as an opportunity for some insight or some learning, is a movement towards freedom from desire and discontent. There's a kind of inference that there's a relaxed quality to the mind. One of the analogies that's given is that of a shepherd. And there's two kinds of paying attention. He's watching the sheep before the harvest. You have to watch very closely that they don't wander off their designated area and eat all the crops. So it's a very kind of like focused attention. And then there's the kind of attention after the harvest, where like you just don't want any of the sheep wandering too far, but you don't have to pay that kind of close attention. And the relaxed quality of mind is more like the post-harvest shepherd. So then it goes into some of the instructions or examples of how to interface with the contemplation of the body or contemplation of the breath. And it's very simple. Like the verbs are actually quite simple. Breathing in, one knows I breathe in long. Breathing out, one knows I breathe in long. Breathe out long. Breathing in, one knows I breathe out short. Breathing out, I know the breath is short. And so the verb is knowing. It's not some like control or manipulation or figuring something out or protecting something, perfecting something. It's just knowing. Can we know what's happening with our breath? And in that simplicity of knowing is an opportunity to reflect, like what's our approach? Is our approach kind of light or playful, or is it kind of more of like a sledgehammer approach to meditation? And then it shifts to breathing in, experiencing the whole body, breathing out, experiencing the whole body. And this can be like the whole physical body as a whole, or it can be that sense of the breath as a body, experiencing the breath of the body. Experiencing, also kind of a simple verb. But there's actually a related but different teaching on Anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, that goes through 16 steps of instructions, and interestingly the first 4 relate to the body, the second 4 relate to feeling tone, the third 4 relate to mind, and the fourth 4 relate to actually liberation. So it tracks this foundations of mindfulness. I actually highly recommend that practice. I did a 2-week retreat that was just focused on that teaching, and it was very fruitful. So then there's this thing that Analayo calls the refrain. This appears 13 times in the sutta, so makes me think that it might be important. And there's 3 aspects to this refrain. So it says, in this way, in regard to the body, one abides contemplating the body internally, one abides contemplating the body externally, or one abides contemplating the body both internally and externally. So for every frame of mindfulness, this phrase is repeated. And we spend such a huge amount of time in places like this focused on internal mindfulness, what's happening in this mind system, and almost none on this concept of external mindfulness, the way in which lots of interpretations for this, but the most convincing is the way we're relating to other people, and that we can hold them in awareness in the same way. And while we might not, most of us don't read minds and can't directly know what someone's thinking, we have lots of clues and cues in the way that we can bring awareness to bear in that way. And it's profound, and I think it's the medicine we need for these times, is to learn how to do that. it's also a kind of antidote to meditation becoming too self-centered. It kind of can become this sort of like, some of my teachers talk about bliss junkies, that they just, are like, it's all about that, getting to that little state, and it's not ultimately not fruitful to get beyond those bliss states. The second part of the refrain is one abides. And they use this word abides I like, because it's like one lives. This is like a way of being more than an activity. One abides contemplating the nature of arising in the body, or one contemplates the nature of passing away in the body, or one contemplates the nature of both arising and passing away in the body. So the contemplation that things are always in flux is one of the central contemplations in this entire Buddhist framework. Actually seen as essential for any meaningful sense of awakening. And actually one of the first insights we get is that this is true. Everything is changing. And like there's a way in which we know that on an intellectual level, and then something can happen in this contemplation where it's like, oh my gosh, like this is really true. And there's a tremendous freedom in that realization. So third part of the refrain, mindfulness that there is a body is established in one to the extent necessary for bare knowledge and continuous mindfulness, and one abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. So this phrase, bare awareness, is quite interesting. There's a very popular teaching about this. There's this guy, Bahia. There's kind of a backstory that's interesting, but save that for another time. He comes to the Buddha with a great sense of urgency and says, I need the essential pithy teaching. And there's a whole thing, they're on alms rounds. The Buddha says, this is not the time. And then he asks again, this is not the time. And the tradition and the folklore is if you ask 3 times, then the Buddha will oblige you. And so the teaching he gives him is, when seeing, just see. When tasting, just taste. When smelling, just smell. When thinking, just thinking. And this is what people are talking about when they're talking about bare awareness. It's like the experience through that sense without all the layers of what we add on it, of meaning and liking and not liking and worldview and paradigms and concepts. This is also considered to be like a powerful spiritual development, to be able to like see things from this perspective. It's again pointing to like just as they are. Like you see thoughts as energy arising and passing away, rather than getting stuck in the content of all those thoughts and the dramas of all our thoughts. And one abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. So independence is a kind of independence from needing to satisfy the endless desires that exist in the external world. The independence is a kind of movement from our typical idea of happiness and well-being, which is sourced from conditions outside and acquisitions and status and all the things that we want, to a kind of independence where happiness and well-being is sourced from a different place, different, more mysterious and more reliable place. One abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world, and in the Dharma, the notion is that suffering of all forms, from the mildest to the most extreme, is inextricably linked to this idea of clinging and craving. So this letting go of craving is the letting go of suffering. So that's the body, and I just wanted to go through the others for the sake of completeness. So The second of the four foundations of mindfulness is called feeling tone. The Pali word is Vedana, and it is the perception, it's actually before perception, it's the knowing of an experience is pleasant, unpleasant, or neither unpleasant nor unpleasant quality. It's actually said to just the senses make contact with an object, there's a flicker of Vedana, and then the recognition, this is the person sitting in front of me, maybe I know their name, those kinds of things. So the actual thing is quite subtle and quite fast, and it can be physical or it can be mental. It can be worldly or unworldly. Worldly is considered like the more corporeal body sensations, and unworldly is like the Buddha as a 9-year-old sitting under the rose apple tree and the kind of pleasant feeling of a meditative state. And this is not dependent on the object. This is dependent on the conditions. So, loud driving techno music can be very enjoyable when you're in a club and you went there for that, but when you're trying to sleep at 3 in the morning, it's the opposite. Or the first piece of cake is very pleasant, and the third is like, oh God, what have I done? And the verb here is to know this. It's, again, very simple. To know the experience that's happening, and to know whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, or neither pleasant nor unpleasant. And you see very quickly, if you haven't already, that the body, the mind, the whole system moves toward that which is pleasant, wanting more, wanting it to stay, moves away, or pretends to ignore or suppress what's unpleasant, and usually if it's neutral we just kind of zone out. And this very simple, like body had all these things in it, and this very simple kind of like almost seems silly when you first hear about it thing, it gets its own like section in this treatise on mindfulness. The Buddha actually said all things converge on Vedana. Like this is considered a very important principle. There's another complex teaching that we could spend months and months on called the chain of dependent origination, but I just want to highlight a part of that. This is a cycle of 12, sometimes 10 phenomena that describes the state of samsara, where we move kind of wandering through existence, cycles of suffering. And so there's a part of this chain of events where the sense organs make contact, as I was saying. There's the arising of Vedana, and then from Vedana, perception, and then immediately the movement I was talking about, the grasping, the clinging, the desire, the aversion. And so what's being posited is that if you can be aware of Vedana, you see the unpleasant, and then with strong mindfulness there's a moment, a gap, where we could either go down the habitual patterns of avoidance or denial or lament or whatever our habit pattern is, and say, oh, unpleasant, and use that as an opportunity to retrain the mind into a more fruitful endeavor, maybe to understand this experience more intimately. It's considered an easy place to break the chain. And even on a less, this is a kind of a little bit more metaphysical example, it's very practical in our life. Like if we're trying to be less reactive, this is the fuel of reactivity. If you've ever taken a class on mindfulness, you've heard this quote, between stimulus and response there's a space. In that space lies our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. It's Viktor Frankl. So the third foundation of mindfulness is mindfulness of mind. And the classical teaching, they just describe 8 states of mind. lustful, angry, deluded, distracted. Very familiar states of mind. Those are the ordinary states of mind. Notice they're not like the bad states of mind or the lower states of mind. They're the ordinary states of mind. And then the higher states of mind are great, unsurpassable, concentrated, and liberated. And so the teaching is just to know the state of mind. Is there a lot of wanting in the mind? Is there a lot of desire? Is there anger in the mind? Is the mind confused or distracted? Is there a sense of like freedom in the mind? Is there a sense that the mind is gathered and collected? And I think this is probably obvious, but our state of mind is like everything. Like the whole way we perceive the world, where our attention gets caught and focused, all influenced by our state of mind. And so having some intimacy with the state of mind, some stewardship of the state of mind, like this teaching is about developing that intimacy to know. This particular teaching doesn't have any kind of you're not trying to change anything, but there are other practices that where we can take a ordinary state of mind and abandon it and have a more supportive state of mind. So Dogen, jumping traditions, Zen master said, stop searching for phrases and chasing after words. Take the backward step and turn the light inward. Your body-mind of itself will drop away and your original face will appear. If you want to attain just this, immediately practice just this. So just this, these things that we've been talking about, awareness, moment to moment of what's happening in this moment. And this backward step, this kind of like, is what I was talking about earlier, the connecting with the sky-like nature of the mind, the awareness that knows fear is not fearful, the awareness that knows sadness is not sad. So rather than being trapped in our dramas and conflicts of life, we are seeing them as phenomenon that pass through the field, and like everything are impermanent. So the fourth foundation of mindfulness is mindfulness of dhammas, and you almost never get to this section because it's a bit complex and it requires that you have more maps, because essentially this is a training. So usually what happens is that the shorthand that is given is that Dhamma, the word Dhamma has many meanings. One of the meanings is phenomenon. And so the shorthand Cliff Notes is mindfulness of everything. Sadly, that's not the teaching. The teaching actually is to look at the inner workings of the mind using the various maps and other parts of the teachings to see the causes and conditions of our suffering. And the reason we don't teach this, some of you will know these lists, is that they require that you know these other lists, the 5 hindrances. This is probably the most well-known list. So desire, aversion, restlessness, sleepiness, and doubt. So the practice is we use this map to see the conditions of the mind when doubt is present, when aversion. Just knowing the presence or absence of these conditions of the mind is profoundly helpful. The other maps are the 5 aggregates, the 6 sense bases, the 7 factors of awakening, and the 4 noble truths. So if you know any of these teachings, this is another frame in which you can practice noticing the absence or presence of any one of these conditions of mind. So I'll end with another poem from Mark Nepo. Accepting this. Yes, it is true, I confess. I have thought great thoughts and sung great songs. All of it a rehearsal for the majesty being held. The dream is awakened when thinking I love you, and life begins when saying I love you, and joy moves like blood when embracing others with love. My efforts now turn from trying to outrun suffering to accepting love wherever I can find it. Stripped of causes and plans and things to strive for, I have discovered everything I could need or ask for was right here in flawed abundance. We cannot eliminate hunger, but we can feed each other. We cannot eliminate loneliness, but we can hold each other. We cannot eliminate pain, but we can live a life of compassion. Ultimately, we are small living things awakened in the stream, not gods who carve out rivers. Like human fish, we are asked to experience meaning in the life that moves through the gill of our heart. And there is nothing to do and nowhere to go. Accepting this, we can go everywhere. We can do everything and go anywhere. Mark Nepo, N-E-P-O, and this is called Accepting This. And I said that was the last thing, but I have one more thing. Implicit in all of this is the other central teaching in this tradition, which is that connecting with the places where we experience difficulty and stress and discomfort is ennobling, actually. It's a way, the way of moving beyond is moving through. Which is a very counterintuitive kind of notion. You know, almost like biologically, when something is like unpleasant or undesirable, is this movement of wanting to move away. And yet, you know, one of the first signs of a kind of spiritual maturity is the realization that like profound insights and transformation and the things that we want in meditation often come in the friction of like the difficulty that there is. Like there's the saying of like, you know, it takes friction to polish a gem, in the same way that if we want to polish our hearts and minds, that we need that friction. And there is a, you know, and again, this may be something that you can kind of know on an intellectual level, but when you deeply connect with the notion that whatever's happening in this moment's experience is a kind of training, or can be a kind of training, it's like there's just a profound frame shift that happens in the way you relate to life. Like, nothing's a problem. It's such a different way that we approach life. You know, our suffering is not a problem. It's kind of the part of the package we're given as you know, these beings in a human body, and this teaching says not only is it not a problem, but it is in fact the path to more and more peace and ease and well-being and freedom. Punctuation mark there. Exclamation marks are a little bit overused, so strong period. So now we have a few minutes for questions or comments. Particularly interested if anything that I said struck you in some way, positively or negatively. And just the spirit of this discussion is that it's good if you speak from your own experience, and keep it short and sweet so lots of people will have a chance to participate. And Kenny's got a couple mics. Maybe you want to give one of those to someone else.
Check, check. Okay.
Yeah.
About the, I think Vedana, the feeling tone part. I think I can see pretty clearly that that's like the answer to like everything. Obviously, like if you can have that pause and step away. But even as I practice, and I practice pretty regularly, it's very hard to find that, especially if there's something that's a trigger of some sort of emotional thing, like a conversation about a budget, for instance, which is not easy, right? And like it's a thing that when you have a thing, and so I guess my question is like, what other than practicing more, which I think, obviously I think that helps a lot. What are other ways to kind of find that moment and try to spread it a little more than just having it feel like it disappears so quickly?
Yeah. I mean, you kind of previewed the answer that any meditation teacher would give, which is practice more.
Right. Right.
But there also are, like I think you're talking about a few things. You're talking about the Vedana, and then you're talking about sort of like the after effect. And so both are really good moments to pay attention. Like sometimes there can be a notion of like, oh, I missed the thing that sent me into reactivity, so now I'm just in reactivity. And one thing you can play with is like having a moment of reactivity be the mindfulness bell. So someone's talking about a budget and you're getting whatever it is, angry or anxious or whatever, and you just realize, I'm anxious, so then connect with that experience. What's the experience of anxiety? And then what the part of the training is that you connect with that experience. As this becomes more habitual, you connect with the experience earlier and earlier in the arising of that experience. I used to have this thing, still do struggle with this, that I'm a lawyer, so I work in a field where there is often conflict. And I'll be on the phone and someone will say something outrageous or inflammatory, and then I just notice just say something cutting, it's like, and the more and more I've practiced, the more and more there's this sense of, oh, I'm getting warm, there's some energy rising, and I can actually just say, hey, I'm going to put you on mute for a minute, or, I'm going to take a bio break, and just use that moment. Sometimes the moment is like to just really get kind of inflamed and then let that energy peter out. And sometimes it is just like, oh, this is angry, and I can sort of like talk myself off of this is anger, and bringing kind of a sense of tenderness to this heart that is reacting in some way, and softening the body. Like for me, a lot of these emotional reactivity manifests in tension in the body. So like I'll notice my jaw clenches, and my chest clenches, and my breathing gets shallow, and sometimes just a kind of corrective, sometimes my posture gets off. Just correcting those kinds of things can help.
Is this on? Okay. I'm loud in normal life, so I can't tell if this is loud or not. I bring this up a lot. It's my feeling of helplessness around, most recently, how the immigrants are being treated. Mm-hmm. And I practice every day, and I practice and I practice. And I am finding that I am letting it, just eat at my heart. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's helplessness and frustration and anger and mostly helplessness. And I know if you do small things, you touch someone and they touch someone else, it helps. But, for me, it's the worldview, and it's really hurting.
Yeah. Anybody else feel that way? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just the times are hard, and it is difficult. And if you weren't feeling something, I would be raising my eyebrows. And yet, is there a way that we can feel that grief fully with an attitude of like tenderness towards this aching heart, so that it's not eating you up? That's the only because if you get eaten up, then there's no small thing that you can do or big thing that you can do.
But is there a way, you're saying? So is there a way?
Yeah.
Do you have a prescription?
Keep practicing. practice self-compassion, actually. Sometimes we get the idea that when the world is so bad, we need to be practicing some outward compassion, and maybe we do. But what you're talking about is your heart that's aching, and so what's the medicine for that? You know, I wish there were, like, a wand that we could wave, or like a tincture that I could give you, but this is what it is to be alive in these days. It's very heartbreaking.
Thank you so much.
My name is Rosalie. I'm very reactive, and I would like that prescription. I mean, how do you, I can feel it when it happens, and I am very reactive. I can't say I'm a, ongoing practitioner, so I understand that I should practice more. But still, it's just how you take that bio break, and how does it look to be self-compassionate when you're feeling hurt and betrayed and not very forgiving and embarrassed and all sorts of things that are part of reactivity, and that I'm left holding the bag and don't exactly know what to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I listen to what you're saying, but I think I don't understand.
Yeah. I think it's just hard. That's what it boils down to, is that it's just really hard. And this is why the Buddha spoke of ardency and diligence, and there's so much working against us in our culture that really, to have the skills to cope with it, you have to really commit to developing those skills in some way. But there's simple things, that take some of the sting out of things. Like, one of the things is when we have habits that we don't like, there can be a kind of inner violence, like, I have this and I don't like it and I want to get rid of it. And what would it be like to just love the person who is reactive with all their words, and for who they are, because they're reactive for lots of good reasons and conditions, and maybe that's an opening, starting where we are and bringing more. Sometimes, one of the things they teach in self-compassion, and I've done that training, but one of the things they teach is imagine the dialogue you would have with a close friend who is expressing the same things. How would you speak to that person? And can the inner voice be that friend when our inner voices are often condemning or criticizing? Yeah. So that's the area to start, is to notice that inner dialogue and soften it a little bit, and
Thank you once again for your pearls of wisdom, Guru. Something that I've packed up in my heart to take home with me today is your reminding us that in the midst of friction, it's a call to polish your gem. Yeah. And I love that. I'm in the midst of friction and deep grief. I have a husband who's dying of Parkinson's and dementia. I run a non-profit called Music Men's Minds, working with Alzheimer, dementia, Parkinson patients making music. And I believe that for me, my prescription, of which all of us are looking for the answer, is to find a cause that is close to your heart, that's in your neighborhood, and bring your service home into your neighborhoods, and find somewhere to open your heart and show up and support those that are suffering right within your own neighborhoods. For me, that's the prescription. And I share my prescription with all of you. We're needing volunteers all the time. That was a paid announcement.
I just want to say, my name is Rima, and I think it's just important to stay in the loving. Like, whatever happens around us and whatever is happening, globally, to act locally and to really remember to, like, you can just control what you think and how you touch somebody and how you show up for someone, without any expectation of what it means for them or how, what your expectations are of that other person. And I think that when we can train our brain to stay in a more loving place, more loving things come back. And I think it's just about giving and loving and eliminating that scorecard that all of us tend to keep. And I think that's like just changed the little piece of earth we're standing on.
Yeah, beautiful. We don't have this tradition, but if we did, I would give you a hallelujah or something like. I guess in Buddhist communities they say sadhu, like well spoken.
It's on? Okay, thanks. Something that I've been reading, like I keep coming across it, is a quote, and I don't even know what it's from, but vast is the field of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. And I heard some teacher talking about how no good deed is ever lost. Like there's something that remains from that. And when I get really upset about things, I go back to that, that there's some ephemeral something that remains from everything that we do, like what you do, and it's a comfort.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you.
Hello. This has been beautiful. Thank you. When we were talking about how we feel about how the immigrants are being treated, sometimes when I read about what's going on, I feel this anger. And I was thinking as we were talking that compassion feels good physically. So it's not our concern for the people that feel so bad. It's our anger. People are treating them so bad. They might just...
We'll switch. I think mine's still on, right? Yeah.
Hello. Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Thank you. What I was saying was that I noticed that compassion feels physically really good and anger feels bad. And so when we're thinking of the people who are suffering, that isn't what causes pain. I think it's more when we're thinking of the people and what they are doing to them, the people that we're angry at. And something I found useful in that is to really acknowledge, not in a hateful way, that I have been quite unkind at times in my life. And I think everybody in this room, if we're really honest with ourselves, we will find a time that we were quite heartless and unkind. And if we can look at that with compassion and love for ourselves, and you mentioned something like this and what we were going through at the time, then I think we can look at those who are persecuting immigrants with more compassion, and that compassion feels good. So I thought I'd share that.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm Carrie. Thank you so much.
One more.
I just want to say that I really resonated with when you were talking about the breath being subtle in the practice, because I was working so hard to be still and relaxed and do deep breathing because I have asthma and all kinds of breathing issues. So when I let that go, I started thinking about coloring in a coloring book and went into this other place, and I noticed that my breathing just went into this very, very subtle zone of doing what it needed to do. And then you said the system knows what the conditions call for. And this is something I will think about, hopefully for days, weeks, months, years to come, because I think it's really a great metaphor for everything else, that the system knows, like the system of being, the system of breathing, the system of listening to your life, knows what the conditions call for. So thank you for saying that, because it really was a gift to me, and I'd like to put it on a bumper sticker and put it on my car or on a t-shirt or on my pillow or whatever. But I just think it's a great metaphor. And I would only add that during the earthquake the other night, I'm not from California. I live in Arizona. And so before I had the opportunity to think about it and be afraid of it, I was sitting on the toilet, and I was like, ooh, or like going on a boat ride on the toilet. This is really cool. And I had no judgment about it. I was just like, how often do we know that we're on the earth? We can't feel ourselves spinning. But when I felt the earth rolling, it was like, wow, okay. So when I was breathing and meditating, I felt my body doing that. Like the aliveness word also really came up for me. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just say one thing. It sounds like you're doing fine with practicing the breathing, but oftentimes, or if there are times that it doesn't feel comfortable, the breathing, there's 10 other ways of practicing that I mentioned with the body. And sometimes, if the breathing is a problem, sound is a really good substitute. Just opening to whatever sounds are happening, and that with that sort of bare seeing attitude, so it's not interpreting or listening in this way you would listen to dialogue, but just being with the experience of sound. So there's something to play with. Do we?
Yeah, I just want to say, you want to mention the photo shoot afterwards, because a lot of people are...
Yeah, so there is a InsightLA is working on a new website, and one of the things that they want to appear on this website is photographs of various teachers teaching. And so if any of you are willing and interested in appearing in pictures that will be posted on the internet, just to be clear, it'd be great if you could stay, and then depending on how many people are, we'll stage the shots so it looks like a lot of people. And actually, I think I'll just use that as a segue to talk about some things that I have coming up. Did I write these down? I hope I wrote these down. Yeah, okay. So, at Spirit Rock, I am teaching on August 5th in the Jack Cornfield and Friends event. And I mentioned that because it's live streamed, so if any of you are interested in watching that, or people in the Bay Area, kind of excited about that. On August 17th, I'm leading a day-long for lawyers at Spirit Rock. If you know any lawyers who are practitioners or interested in learning about meditation, they can come to that. It's the second time I've done it. It was lovely the first time. On September 14th, my wife Gabrielle and I are going to be leading a day-long on chanting and bowing. It'll be the third time we've done this. It's been a very meaningful practice to us to invoke a kind of devotional quality into the practice through vibration and sound and movements of the body. And, we're calling that chanting and bowing, listening to the cries of the world with ease, because this is the archetype of Kuan Yin, that she can hold all that's happening in the world with wisdom and compassion. And so if any of that speaks to you, that'll be here on September 14th. And then on October 23rd to 27th, really excited about this, we're doing a 4-day, 4-night residential retreat for lawyers and law students. And again, an opportunity to learn to meditate or be around other practitioners. And so if any of you are secretly lawyers or recovering lawyers or have friends or family members, this is a very something that's very close to my heart. I've been practicing law for 26 years, and it's the place of a lot of suffering, and I'm like very moved to be of service in that community. So, and then on July 20th, I'm doing a day-long for people of color, self-identified people of color, on the east side. So if you fit that bill or you know someone who does, I would love to practice with them. And then, you all know that this group is offered on the principle of generosity, the notion that the teachings are priceless and shared freely, as a labor of love, really, and yet the center has lots of bills to pay, lots of employees and insurance and payroll and utilities and all this fancy equipment. So your generosity is received with great gratitude and supports the center and supports me. So whatever you're able to give, again, is appreciated.
And also just a donate button.
Oh, and for you people online, the 3 of you that are online, there's a donate button. Actually, I was before they got this thing, Jack was giving the Dharma talk, and there were 9,000 people who watched it, and I got kind of freaked out because I thought I was the week after, and I thought, oh my God, and then there were 36 people who watched me, so it was about right. So thank you all for your participation and kind listening.